Hello, all you heroes out there taking a stand to help right a terrible wrong. Whether you've been with us from the beginning or you only joined us today, thank you for taking the decision to pursue truth and justice for Jodie, for Luke, and for all of us. Because, as I've said for so long, until this case is properly resolved, any one of us could find ourselves or a loved one wrongly accused or convicted. Or any one of us could find years down the line that a murderer, a brutal murderer, has been living in our communities, walking freely among us, while another innocent person's life is wrecked. I decided to make today's video because of something that happened, a couple of things that happened a few weeks ago. As you know, I'm a truth seeker, and that means searching for the truth wherever it might be and wherever that might lead. I said for many, many, many years, even if an independent review was to find Luke absolutely, unequivocally guilty, I would not regret 1 minute of the time I've spent searching for the truth, for the answers to all those questions that still remain unanswered today. I don't believe that any review, however thorough, would come to that conclusion. But it's still a possibility, however remote, that we have to bear in mind. I've been asked more times than I can count, what if you're wrong? That's a question that's driven me down every single rabbit hole that I've ever come across, not just in this case, but in many other cases as well. But my point to all of this is we as citizens, we shouldn't have to wonder. We shouldn't have to battle through mountains of unanswered questions, bizarre explanations, stuff that just doesn't add up, in order to be confident that our authorities are doing what we believe them to be doing. We shouldn't have to endure the silencing, the ridicule, the attempted cancelling that comes with asking valid questions, obvious questions. But I digress. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a quest to find a tiny piece of information. I knew I had it. I just wanted it right there in front of me for absolute verification. And during that search, I happened on an old video, one that was made before the documentary. And one little bit of that video hit me like a sledgehammer. Part of the truth-seeking journey, quite obviously, is finding and identifying truth tellers. Now, there's been a lot of focus on lies, mistakes, misrepresentations in the accounts of witnesses against Luke. But there's been very little focus on what was truthful in those accounts. For a long time, I've said that I believed that Janine, Jodie's sister, was doing her best to tell the truth, even as her family was being convinced by investigators that Luke was Jodie's killer and it was only a matter of time before they gathered the evidence they needed to arrest him. We know now that other people were being told that from day two. So I've no reason to doubt that if others were being told it, then Jodie's family most certainly were. So why do I single out Janine for attention in relation to truth telling? Well, at the very beginning, Janine was the only one who got the time of her mother's call to Alice Walker that night, the one looking for Jodie. Janine was the only one that got the time of that call right. Everyone else, every single other person who gave statements, placed that call and others claimed to be related to it somewhere between 10 p.m. and 10:30. But the call from Judith to Alice was nearly 15 minutes later. It would be easy in those circumstances to think that Janine was mistaken and all the others were correct, since there was only one of her and so many of them. But the phone records don't lie. In this case, everyone else was mistaken and only Janine was correct. She said she looked at the clock because she thought it was strange that someone would be calling that late at night. Now, we know that's not entirely true. There were people in calls going to and from that house into the wee hours of the morning on other occasions. Maybe Janine meant it was strange for a call to come in on the landline at that time. If she did, she didn't specify that. But she specifically looked at the clock, and the clock said 10:45 p.m. Give or take a minute either side, that is bang on with the phone records. But there's more. More than a year and a half later, in spite of the apparent pressure put on her family, and especially the 3 members of the search party, in spite of the media hype, in spite of all the local gossip, Janine went on the stand and at critical points told the truth again. She told the court her mother knew perfectly well that Jodie used Ronsdyke Path on her own. Donald Finlay gave her a chance to correct herself. He said, "Really?" She didn't correct herself. She agreed a second time that her mother knew that Jodie used Ronsdyke Path on her own, blowing apart the family story that Jodie would only use the path if Luke came up to these houses to walk her down. In turn, that destroyed any claim that Luke had any reason to be at the East House's end of the path around tea time on June 30th. Janine also never wavered from her evidence that Jodie's grounding ended more than a week prior to the murder. She gave the police the exact dates, the day of her exam when she came home early and found Jodie in her grand's house skipping school. Janine texted Judith and Jodie was grounded right there and then. Janine gave the 4-week period of the grounding and the fact that it had become less and less severe as the weeks went on. That evidence was backed up by Alice Walker, Jodie's gran, Jodie's friends and some of their parents where she'd spent time in the duration of that grounding, and by the taxi driver who took Jodie home on Saturday 28th June from Luke's house because she was going to be late home. Jodie was not grounded on June 30th. Her grounding wasn't lifted that day, and her own sister and grandmother confirmed that truth. I'm not going to say why wasn't Jodie's mother recalled when it was proven by her own family members that her accounts to the jury about these 2 central parts of the prosecution narrative were completely wrong. But the fact is, Janine's comments about Judith knowing that Jodie used the path alone show Judith's evidence here not only to be wrong, but to be actively dishonest. Now, you know how sometimes you can look at something 999 times and then on the 1000th look you see something that you didn't see before, or in my case, never realised the significance of. Little tiny details that can change the entire narrative. While I was searching for that little bit of information I was talking about earlier, I came across this. Listen carefully.
Jodie's sister, on the stand, it was put to her, had Luke not doubled back to the V, they would have walked right past Jodie that night and carried on all the way to Newbattle. And her sister said, "We weren't going all the way to Newbattle, we were only going to the path."
We were not going to Newbattle. We were only going to the path. Thank you, Janine, for the truth. When Alice was asked why they headed straight to the path without looking for Jodie anywhere else, she said, "We just did." That was in court. Janine said in court, "We weren't going to Newbattle. We were only going to the path." The trial should have stopped right there. If they were only going to the path, there had to be a reason for that. Basic logic tells us they weren't going beyond the path because they believed there was nothing to find beyond the path. But that makes no sense. As I've pointed out before, there are many points along the Newbattle Road where a young girl could be snatched into the woodland in the blink of an eye. It can't be because Luke had already checked the Newbattle Road, because within seconds of Luke reaching the search trio, Alice Walker was suggesting they go back down and double check. The path Luke had just come up. Not the route, the path. And it can't be because they knew they were going to meet Luke on the path rather than the new Battle Road, because by all accounts, none of them communicated with Luke that night prior to meeting him at the top of the path. Yet, when they set out, it was to the path and nowhere else. We already know they walked past places Jodie was known to frequent in Mayfield without checking. We know they didn't look for her on any other part of the journey from Mayfield to the path. And now, in that one comment on the stand, under oath from Janine, we now also know that they never intended to go or look anywhere else beyond the path. Think about this. According to all of their statements, the information they had was that Jodie was supposed to be hanging out in East Houses and Mayfield that night. No one, apparently, other than Luke, knew Jodie would be heading to New Battle. And yet, when it's discovered that Jodie's missing, the only place on the radar is the path. Not before it, not after it, just the path itself. We were only going to the path. Unless I'm missing something, and if anyone can see it, please point it out. I'd be much happier to be wrong than right about this one. But unless I'm missing something, the only possible explanation is that they already knew or strongly suspected that something happened to Jodie on that path, and there was no point in looking for her after the end of the path because they knew or strongly suspected that Jodie never made it off the end of that path. It would also appear to suggest that they knew there was no point in looking for Jodie before the start of the path, for the same reasons. That's a horribly uncomfortable suggestion, and I don't make it lightly. But this is the actual evidence of Jodie's own family members. We didn't look for her anywhere on the route to the path. We didn't start turning our torches on or calling out for her until we got to the path. We had no intention of searching beyond the other end. Now, people have said in the past, the path would have been the obvious place to look. Well, yes, if they'd known she was going to New Battle, but they insisted they didn't. And the factually correct observation is that the path would have been one of the obvious places to look. Not the only one. And I'm not going to go back over previous times Jodie was late home or the places that were completely ignored. We all know about that. It could also be argued that they weren't going to check the New Battle Road because Jodie never made it to Luke's. But there are two problems with that. The first, as I've already said, is they didn't know that's where Jodie was going. When Luke told Judith Jodie hadn't turned up that evening, Judith didn't ask where they were supposed to be meeting, so although they knew Luke hadn't met Jodie, they'd no way of knowing where he hadn't met her. And secondly, Luke wouldn't have met Jodie at the end of the path. He was waiting for her on a wall at the end of his street. So she could still have come to harm on the New Battle Road between the end of the path and Luke Street. The realisation that they knew, before they even set out, that their search would begin and end on the path has stunned me, even all these years later. In all that time, I was focused on the start of the claimed search and why they didn't look anywhere else on the way to the path. Because Jodie was found before they got to the other end, I hadn't thought the other end of the path was particularly important. To realise now the significance of Janine's statement in court, that they'd also decided in advance not to go beyond the end of the path, has stripped away much of the confusion. That's the thing about truth-seeking. You keep digging and digging until you've dug all the way down to the cold, hard facts. however unpalatable they may be. Another cold, hard fact is hidden right there in plain view in Alice Walker's response to Donald Finlay at trial. We know we asked her why they'd gone directly to the path without checking anywhere else, and Alice replied, "We just did." It hadn't occurred to me before. That was an admission, a confirmation that that's exactly what happened. She didn't disagree with Finlay or try to argue that they had looked for Jodie anywhere else. No, she agreed that they went directly to the path without looking. So, dig down again. One member of the search trio is agreeing on oath. We went directly to the path without checking anywhere else on the way. And another is saying we were only going to the path, nowhere else, and certainly not beyond the New Battle end of the path. Again, what's the only logical explanation? Whatever other allowances we can make for shock, errors in recall, and so on, the only place left to go with this information is that by 11:05 that night, less than 25 minutes after Luke told Judith he hadn't seen Jodie, someone in the search trio believed or strongly suspected that something happened to Jodie on Ronsdyke Path. Alice later tried to say she thought Jodie might be lying hurt somewhere. Again, why? Jodie had been much later home before, and no one thought she might be lying hurt somewhere. What made Alice immediately think Jodie was hurt, rather than, for example, sitting stoned in a friend's house, just like she was the last time she was late home? So now, as we piece it all together, before anywhere else had been checked, Jodie's gran knew or strongly suspected that Jodie was hurt, and hurt badly enough that she was lying somewhere on or near to Ronsdyke Path. So not just a bloody nose or the like from a fight, but lying hurt, unable to get home or to call out for help. This is the only possible conclusion that can be drawn from the family's own evidence. It's been an area of speculation before, but the combination of Alice's agreement that they went straight to the path, Janine's statement that they had no intention of going beyond the other end of the path, and Alice's claim that Jodie might have been lying hurt somewhere, all but removes that element of speculation. One other claim, right there in the family statement, adds another deeply uncomfortable element to all of this. We know Judith said that when she heard the searchers had found a body, she ran right up to the entrance to the path and was intercepted at the junction of Ronsdyke and the Lady Path by a police officer who led her to the car park where the others already were. The police officer's statement verifies that. But in a later statement, Judith has obviously been asked why she ran straight to the path. Her answer was, "I knew they'd been searching in the woods." But they hadn't, had they? They walked down the path, not through the woodland strip itself. There was no searching in the woods as such. When Mia reacted on the path side, Luke doubled back, climbed over, and turned back in the direction of where Mia had reacted and found Jodie. We don't know what Judith was told about the finding of Jodie's body that night, or even who told her. But up to that point, she only knew, according to all her other statements, that the trio was out looking. She had no idea where they were looking. She knew that Luke was coming up the path and said in a later statement, "I don't know how they met up with Luke. No one's explained that to me." Once again, there are only two possible explanations for Judith's comment that she knew they'd been searching in the woods. Either someone told her that, for some reason, in the same phone call that they broke the news about finding Jodie's body, or for some reason, Judith believed that when they went out looking, they'd be looking in the woods. But that leads us to another anomaly. Why that particular spot, along the lane to the junction of the paths? There are woods right along the back of East houses at a right angle to Ronsdyke Path. There are woods from the complex up through the playing fields to Mayfield. The route the searchers took to get to the path in the first place, and the area they all believed Jodie was going to be hanging out in that evening. There are woods right round the field between Ronsdyke Path and New Battle Abbey College. Why and how did Judith know exactly which woodland strip to head for? These lines of thought, once they start, have a real tendency to snowball into other areas. Where might there be something else of significance that I haven't realised because I've been too focused in the opposite direction? So I went back to the grounding story and rechecked everything I thought I knew. Since the very, very beginning, I knew that Luke called a taxi on the night of Saturday 28th June because Jodie was going to miss her 10 p.m. curfew. It's how I knew Jodie wasn't grounded that day, and of course it was fully backed up by the case papers. So, was there any detail in all of that I'd missed? Yep, there was. For those of you who've read Innocence Portrayed, you'll remember that according to Judith, Jodie's brother Joseph had a series of breakthroughs the weekend immediately before Jodie was murdered. Prior to that, it was claimed he was a recluse who never left his own home due to his mental illness, which Judith described at trial as paranoia. That wasn't the true psychiatric diagnosis, but that's another story. On Saturday 28th June, his mother enticed him out of the house with promises of cans of beer to stay at his grand's, Alice Walker's. She didn't say why that particular weekend she decided to try to encourage him to go and stay overnight elsewhere. And there was no suggestion of any sort of building up period, you know, an hour for a coffee over a couple of days, building up to maybe a whole afternoon, and then finally maybe a whole day or an overnight stay. No. From complete recluse to overnight stay elsewhere in one move. It appeared to have been a successful short, sharp shock approach because the following day when Judith went to collect him, he didn't want to come home. He stayed until tea time. And then Judith picked him up at tea time and took him home, and then almost miraculously, he'd become so confident that he decided less than 3 hours later to walk all the way back up to his grand's by himself and stay the night again. On the morning of June 30th, in spite of her claim that she had to drive Joseph everywhere because he wouldn't go anywhere alone, Judith decided to have a lie-in that Monday morning, and her partner took the car to work. But what about Joseph, still at his grand's? How's he going to get home? Well, another incredible breakthrough. He decided to walk from his grand's to his mum's with John Ferris and a 9-bar of cannabis for company. Not a hint of the paranoia that made life so difficult for the whole family up until June 28th. That same afternoon, June 30th, less than 2 hours before the claimed time of Jodie's murder, yet another breakthrough. The weekly home visit from the psychiatrist was cancelled. Clearly, Joseph was so well recovered in 48 hours that he no longer needed specialist care. So what's any of that got to do with the grounding story? After the taxi picked Jodie up from Luke's just before 10 p.m. on Saturday 28th June, where did it take her? Home. To her grand's, Alice Walker's. Who else was staying in Alice Walker's house that night? Her brother Joseph, having been enticed there with cans of beer, and John Ferris. Looking back now, it's clear that Joseph and Ferris were awaiting the arrival of the cannabis. According to Alice, they were out until after midnight on the Saturday. Yet another breakthrough for Joseph. And then on the Sunday, like I said, Joseph didn't want to leave. And when he finally did, he was only away a few hours before he headed straight back. And then, who would believe it, Monday morning, the two of them strolling down the road with their 9-bar. But nowhere in any of those statements is it clearly specified that Jodie went home to her grand's that night. The same night Joseph and Ferris were staying there through some crazy series of coincidences. Why not? Why were the statements so selectively worded that it's almost impossible to piece that little but potentially crucial piece of information together? Why didn't Alice say, for example, on the Saturday night, Jodie came back here just after 10 o'clock, Joseph and Ferris were here too, they didn't come until after midnight. But no, those 3 snippets are dotted about in different statements, sometimes days or even weeks apart. There's another piece of information in the middle of all this that's pretty mind-blowing in this context. One of them gave a statement telling a story about a piece of cannabis being found on Alice Walker's carpet. And all of the others agree, the extended family and friends agree, it could only have belonged to Luke. Whatever other benefits of the doubt can be given about the family giving information to the police pointing them towards Luke, this one can be nothing other than a blatant lie intended to divert attention away from the amount of cannabis that was swirling about in this particular group. Again, it's only when you go through all of the statements and follow each line as it weaves in and out of the concocted narrative rather than concerted narrative that those things can be pieced together. Nobody, and I mean not a single one of them, gave a cohesive story all the way through in a single statement. I was reading the transcripts of Luke's interviews recently. They went over and over and over every single detail, following up all the different lines until Luke had told them every last detail he could remember from start to finish. But with the others, details pop up in August, September, the following year, in total isolation from everything else, and then they just get lost in the mountain of information. We know Lothian and Borders sought an offender profile from the FBI, but almost unbelievably, there was no victimology study or report. They didn't look at the circumstances in which Jodie lived her day-to-day life, or who she spent her time with when she was not with Luke. They didn't check up on things like where she went, with whom, how often, or for how long. They accepted at face value the depiction of a 14-year-old girl who always obeyed the rules, did as she was told her mum everything, never lied. It's rubbish. We know it is. And that's no disrespect to Jodie. She was a normal 14-year-old girl, pushing the boundaries, finding out who she was, experimenting with life. If you think about it, Jodie was grounded for skipping school and smoking cannabis. Well, clearly her mum didn't know about them prior to them happening. So Jodie wasn't telling her everything. It pains me that the normality of Jodie, the personality that was Jodie, is crushed beneath this two-dimensional portrayal of her. But, to go back to what I was saying, something as simple as a check of her phone would have given them an idea of people Jodie spoke with regularly, prior to her phone being broken. And then they could have investigated why. So, we know now, for example, that Jodie arranged directly with John Ferris to get cannabis. He told the police that himself. Was there any regularity to that? Where did she meet him? Were there specific times? Were there others Jodie met or spoke with that to this day we know nothing about? We know, for example, about the occasion where, before Jodie started going out with Luke, when she didn't come home and was found in the wee hours of the morning in Yvonne Walker's flat, out of her face, as Janine put it, with a group of others who were also out of their faces. Janine left her there, not wanting to embarrass her. Children, looking after children. Jodie would have been just turned or just turning 14, and Janine 16, going on 17 at that time. They didn't follow up on the vulnerability of Jodie's situation. People around her with mental illness, low-level criminality, violence, alcohol abuse, homes, drugs, homes with occupants coming and going like shifting sands. They accepted Judith's claim that she always knew where Jodie was and who she was with, even as the other statements proved this to be patently wrong. Alice Walker lied to Judith about Jodie's whereabouts on at least one occasion that we know of. So in truth, nobody knew for sure where Jodie went, who she was with, or what she got up to, except for when she was with Luke. And that wasn't new. Does it make a difference that Jodie was with Joseph and Ferris in Alice Walker's house just 24 hours before she was murdered, while they were awaiting a fairly large delivery of cannabis? The bottom line is, we don't know, and now we probably never will. Even on the day she was murdered, we don't know the truth about Jodie's movements. We only have her mother and Joseph's word that she came in from school at her normal time. Her school bag was there, so she did come in at some point. But Joseph had been smoking cannabis all day, and Judith had been drinking vodka since lunchtime. Contrast that with the Mitchells. Corinne's at work when a call comes in from Luke on the home landline asking what to cook for dinner. His grandmother answered the call before handing the phone to Corinne. His grandmother was never asked to give a statement, but the call is logged in the phone records. His brother called the house to say he was going to be a bit later home from work. That call is logged in the phone records. Corinne says she went home from work, arriving there by 5:15. There are 2 sets of CCTV footage, 2 separate sets that support that. Luke called Jodie's mother's landline at 5:34 to tell Jodie had his dinner and he was out. We know that one didn't get answered and he had to make another, but 5:34. So there are just 19 minutes in there not covered by independent evidence for Luke's family. 19 minutes. Yet Judith's account of Joseph's movements cover a period of some 9 hours with nothing to corroborate them. She cancels the doctor's home visit. She's mistaken about the amount of time Ferris spent in her house. She's no idea when he left. Joseph at one point claimed the whole family, including Jodie, ate dinner at the table. So it seems pretty clear to me which accounts were more reliable. As always, I'm not making any claims regarding who murdered Jodie. I simply don't know, and it's not my job to try to guess. I'm focusing on a police investigation that managed to miss or ignore so much potentially important information in their bloody-minded pursuit of Luke. On a different note, someone in the group mentioned the 2 people seen by Andrea and Bryson at the entrance to the path that day. And here we go again. Tiny details. It's always been assumed that because nobody else was ever traced, then those 2 people must have been Luke and Jodie. That's always been the case. There was nobody else there, so it must have been them. Nobody else ever came forward, so it must have been them. But I remembered something that I thought might be significant, so I went back and had another look. Buried in the case files, there's a story about John Ferris on the moped heading along Lady Path. Almost at the junction of the paths, so he's still on Lady Path, but he's almost at the point where it meets Rowan's Dyke. He met a young couple who know him. A young couple who are not Jodie and Luke. The point where he met them is less than 2 minutes walk from the point where Andrina Bryson said she made her sighting. The couple were traced and confirmed seeing Ferris on the moped and speaking to him, but crucially, they were unable to be precise about the time. All they could say was that it must have been after 4:30 p.m. Their statements don't say specifically that they came in from the East Houses road, but given the way they turned onto Lady Path, it seems fairly obvious that they did. It's interesting that they weren't just asked that outright so that it would be in their statements. But if they came in from the East Houses road, they are now in the place, in the vicinity, within the finally manufactured time of Andrina Bryson's sighting. Now, we know there are serious doubts about that sighting. The timings don't match up, the descriptions don't match up. It was claimed the original sighting was made by Mrs. Bryson's husband. But what we can say now is the claim that there were no other people near the entrance to the path who could account for the claimed sighting no longer stands. There was another couple. So let's go back to the manufacturing of the timeline in order to construct the case against Luke. The police needed the time of death to be 5:15. Any other time, and it couldn't have been Luke. The Bryson sighting initially was too late, even though it actually fitted better with original accounts of Jodie leaving about 5:30. Weeks later, the information about the couple and John Ferris emerges. Now, throughout this case, there's been a nugget of truth in many of the accounts. It's just that it's been twisted and manipulated out of recognition. And so it happens here. There was a couple at a time that better suited the police narrative. All that remained was to find a way to tie that couple to the Bryson sighting, then claim it was Jodie and Luke. Job done. It would also account for the massive anomaly that there were never, ever any police appeals for a young couple who might have been at the entrance to the path that evening to come forward. Remember, they had the details of the Bryson sighting by the evening of July 2nd at the very latest. Thereafter, they put out appeals for the moped boys, the stocky man, anyone who'd been in the vicinity of the path, but not, I have to emphasise, on the East Houses Road, to come forward. The Bryson sighting at that point should have been the biggest lead, yet they did nothing to confirm or refute the claim that the couple could have been Jodie and Luke by asking others who might have been that couple to come forward. And we now know the reason for that is that they'd already spoken to them. We've since had reports of another young couple being followed by a man who was acting strangely on the East Houses Road that evening. As yet, we've been unable to confirm those reports, and once again, I would urge the people involved, please make contact. Your details will be kept strictly confidentially. Just message me, please. I've been working on this case for almost 20 years. Always ready for the possibility that something might emerge to prove that Luke Mitchell did, in reality, kill Jodie Jones. In all those years, I have followed up on thousands of leads, pieces of information, private messages, spoken to people. To date, not only has nothing come up to suggest Luke was involved in any way, but more and more and more information has been uncovered that points to a police investigation that was actively ignoring or dismissing any information that didn't fit their chosen narrative. What's shocking about these latest discoveries is they were right there at the heart of the case, there for both the prosecution and the defence to see more than 18 years ago. Had there been the time or the will to pick apart the different statements and lay all of the facts bare. It's taken me, in spite of years of trawling through every document I could lay hands and eyes on, until now, to realise the significance of some of the almost throwaway comments buried in those statements and testimonies. So when I heard people asking recently, how did they miss her? How did they miss that? Or how did they miss that? I find myself asking the same question. How did I miss this? And that's exactly why we need an independent review. Fresh eyes, fresh minds, access to all of the information, able to pinpoint the gaps, the anomalies, and the actual links that have been there in plain view for almost 2 decades. We will be updating you all very soon about the next steps in the petition process. And again, a massive thank you to everybody who signed. And for now, until the next update, thank you for listening.